Welcome to the ICU Podcast, where we explore the vestibular experience through conversations between patients and the health professionals who care for them.
During this podcast, we invite patients to share their stories and healthcare professionals to ask questions so they are equipped to better care for and truly see the invisible challenges faced by their patients. I'm Kimberly Warner.
And I'm Cynthia Ryan, and we are your hosts on this journey of discovery.
Welcome, everyone, to the ICU Podcast. I am really looking forward to today's discussion. We are going to talk about brain fog. I think all of us have experienced this. So sounds a little bit like some sort of weather pattern, and we know that it's not. What is brain fog, though? What really is it? And why do so many vestibular patients experience it? Some people describe it as forgetfulness, confusion, a lack of focus, difficulty concentrating or making decisions, or just a vague sense of blurry thinking, like your head is in the clouds. When the brain is dedicating a great deal of energy to maintaining equilibrium and staying steady, activities such as recalling details or short-term memory may become more difficult, and thinking might seem slow. So first, I want you to know that this is normal. Today, we'll talk to a patient who knows about brain fog all too well, and also a doctor who has helped thousands of women learn to manage this frustrating symptom. Yay! So excited. Our first guest is Dr. Kathleen Jordan, and she is the Chief Medical Officer at Midi, a virtual care clinic for women going through menopause and perimenopause. She has personally experienced the struggle to find a healthcare provider she can consider a partner in her journey toward wellness. She created Midi to put high-quality, patient-centered care within reach for all women at midlife. As an expert in women's health, Dr. Jordan is very familiar with brain fog, otherwise known as menopause brain. And men, we're not excluding you here. So this is not just about menopause. And Dr. Kathleen also has some great suggestions for us as to how to recognize and manage it. Welcome, Kathleen. It's so good to have you here.
Yeah, I'm excited for this conversation. Thank you.
And I'm excited to welcome Ann Walder, one of Vita's ambassadors, who has struggled with migraines all her life. The word vestibular migraine entered her vocabulary after an illness that damaged her inner ears when she was 48. And early on, Ann says that brain fog was something fierce. She was blessed to connect with the vestibular community and find qualified healthcare providers early in her journey. And her family has been very supportive. She's found many friends among Vita's ambassadors, and she currently works as an activity specialist with the elderly and says that helping others brings her true happiness. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Ann, let's learn a little bit more about you. We always like to start the show with a deeper dive into your vestibular migraine journey, in particular for you. So where would you like to begin with that?
Sure. Well, at 48, that was December 2018. I was probably having about 2 migraines a month. I was thinking, I'm going into menopause. I'm going to be done with migraines, just like my mother. And that month, December 2018, I had a bout of shingles out of nowhere, and it affected the trigeminal nerves 2 and 3 on my face. I had 2 little blisters and extreme ear pain and jaw pain on my left side. And it really took me down. It was the worst pain I've ever felt in my life. And once I, got through that, the next month I started feeling the extreme pain again on my right side. And it was in my deep, deep inner ear, all in the same nerves, but it was on the right side of my face. And I thought, I'm getting shingles on the right side of my face. And I remember that day, my doctor was out of the office. It was Wednesday, and he was our family doctor for like 20 years. And no one in his office believed me. You can't get bilateral shingles. And I I begged and pleaded for an antiviral because I knew the blisters would be coming. And I got a doctor that knew that doctor at a quick care to give me the antiviral so I could be relieved of that part of the shingles. So I was left with trigeminal nerve pain on both sides of my face, post-herpetic, which is like something that follows shingles, um, on both sides of my face and deep in my inner ears, and then also tinnitus. Um, After that, I feel like I have long-term shingles still. I have, episodes of, extreme thirst, um, a lot of fatigue, and that's all followed me since shingles 5 years ago. Um, if I don't take a medication, an antiviral, I will have flare-ups deep in my inner ears and all in my face of all that nerve pain, even muscular, nerves that jump on my face. So then we'll go ahead and we jump into the summer. And I was at Hilton Head. I was riding wave runners out in the Atlantic Ocean. I was doing everything you could imagine doing. But every once in a while, I'd get dizzy, and the dizziness started, and I wouldn't be able to look at a YouTube video. So I'd have these odd occurrences, and then I would find myself, being really unstable on my feet, not being able to hold an infant, not wanting to hold an infant. My niece was baptized, and I didn't want to hold her because I thought, oh, I'm going to drop her. And then by September, I was in bed. I couldn't walk. I was having all of these vestibular symptoms. My ears were like all closed up. I felt like I was told by one ENT, oh, maybe you have Meniere's. So I made all of these appointments for late fall. And in the meantime, I just needed to try to keep my job and stay in bed. When I would deal with these symptoms. And it's funny, all throughout that time, I never really had any migraine pain. I had all these symptoms of either Meniere's or vestibular migraine. I had a little bit of brow pain, but no one knew what it was, and I couldn't couldn't be seen until I was looking at my notes here. I don't think I was seen by anyone until November. So that was, a couple of months in bed. And when I was seen, I saw Dr. Hain downtown Chicago, and he had the big Vita plaque on the wall. And I saw a couple other doctors, and I was diagnosed with vestibular migraines and possibly Meniere's. I have all the symptoms of Meniere's except the hearing loss. Um, so I started vestibular therapy that following January, and that helped. And medications, once I had seen those doctors in that November, and I was able to get my life back with some of those medications. Every now and again I have flares, but for the most part, I was able to keep my full-time job. And I left, a year or two later, not because of my illness, but because of my lack of interest in the full-time job.
Mhm.
So I was happy to be able to do that. So,
Great.
yeah.
Wow. It's so interesting, how shingles, another, viral condition is a cause of many people's vestibular journey. So that's really interesting to hear.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
we've heard that with COVID as well,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
viruses attacking the vestibular nerve.
Yeah,
So, and I know we're going to hear more about your experience with brain fog, but I want to switch to Dr. Jordan and ask you. I know you're involved. Your focus is women's health. So how is women's health and brain fog connected?
whew, big question. I can't help but comment though on Anne's uh, foray with uh, oh my god, I'm having brain fog.
Don't worry.
With shingles. So I want to remind the audience that shingles is fairly common, and the incidence of shingles goes up in midlife or with immunosuppression. So about 25% of us will get shingles if we don't get vaccinated. And there is an indication to get a vaccine starting at age 50 or earlier if you're immunosuppressed. So if you have HIV or if you frequently go on steroids for asthma or any immunosuppression for other illnesses. So I would remind everyone
Mhm.
that there is a vaccine out there that's available. It's often covered by insurance. It's covered by insurance if you have an indication. If you're over 50, you can get it from your local CVS, Walgreens, wherever is providing vaccines in your area. It does often require a physician order this vaccine in particular because of the indications. If you get a doctor's order, it's usually covered. So reminder to do that.
Mhm.
But back to your question about brain fog and women in midlife, I feel like I should start with sort of explaining how what women say when they come in complaining about brain fog. It's all the symptoms that Kimberly cited off, right? So forgetfulness, poor attention, struggling with remembering people's names. And I'm going to reassure the audience and tell you that most women have brain fog in midlife. Men can also have it because it can be brought on by medications. There's medical conditions like COVID, thyroid disease, blood sugar changes, depression actually can have some manifestations and symptoms of brain fog. But what women are worried about is they're worried it's early onset dementia. And
Mm.
brain fog and dementia are two very different things,
Mm.
right? So brain fog, first of all, is not a disease state. There's no like entry in the medical books for brain fog. It's a sort of non-medical layperson's description of challenges they have with being sharp or quick or focus on attention. And it can be temporary, caused by some of the things I mentioned. And it's usually not progressive. And
Mm.
midlife women have more of it than others because menopause can trigger a lot of brain fog symptoms. There's lots and lots of science that show that when your estrogen levels decrease in midlife with menopause, you get changes in activity of dopamine, serotonin, GABA. And these are your neurotransmitters that control like your attention, and it controls how much you can focus.
Mm.
Dementia which is what women are worried about, and I would say people are worried about, particularly in midlife. We're starting to take care of our parents, and our parents may be getting dementia, and you're worried you may get it too. So people are interested in prolonging their cognitive abilities and not getting dementia, and then get concerned when they have these temporary challenges. By and large, in midlife, brain fog is hugely much more common and not a sign that you have early dementia. So the average age of dementia diagnosis is 83.
Mm.
And only 6% of Alzheimer's occurs like before the ages of 65, right? So I do think it's important what we do in our midlife because it can prolong the time to dementia. And I do think it's important to screen for dementia because if you do have early onset Alzheimer's disease, you do want to usually intervene early. But by and large, we have lots of women coming in complaining of brain fog, and almost all of them will screen out, like they don't have dementia. And the few that do,
Mm.
we have to go to a neurologist and get further testing, diagnostics, and potential therapy. But the hallmark difference with dementia diagnosis is that it's a progressive illness that actually begins to interfere with your daily life. So, for example, someone with brain fog may struggle to remember someone's name, but someone with dementia may get lost and forget how to come home, right? They may, someone with brain fog may have trouble focusing and paying attention. Someone with dementia would have really a true apathy, a change in personality, an inability to sort of lean in and participate to the point it starts to interfere with both their social and their thinking functions. So it's the change in like functional daily living that really is the hallmark of dementia. Um, and also that it's progressive and there's a pathologic diagnosis. It is a disease state. There are different kinds of dementia, right? So there's Alzheimer's disease,
Mhm.
there's multi-infarct dementia, There's dementia secondary to Parkinson's, there's Lewy body, there's mad cow, right? But these are aggressive, progressive, declining functioning levels, and generally reserved for people later in life. So.
I
And
can
so
see
you,
how the vestibular patients might be confused at this point, though, because what you're saying, this differentiation is clear, what you're saying, Dr. Jordan, between dementia and brain fog. However, when you add a vestibular disorder in there, you do have loss of function of life. You do go through periods of deep depression and isolation, and your entire lifestyle changes. And so I could see how specifically maybe even vestibular patients are like, oh my God, maybe this actually is dementia, according to what you just classified between the two or differentiated between the two. So it's obviously a very gray, foggy area. But I want to bring your experience in, Anne, just to hear a little bit about your own experience of the fuzzy headedness and what that looks like for you. And if you've been able to identify what those triggers are.
Sure. Well, in the beginning, I didn't know what it was. I had no idea it had a name. I didn't know what it was. I just felt like I was in a fishbowl in those early months. And I think part of it is because of my ears feeling so clogged. And I just knew I couldn't drive a car, and this general practitioner that I knew so well, he'd say, Anne, is it anxiety? Why do you not want to drive a car? And I'd said, well, if someone gave you a stiff drink, would you want to drive a car? And he said, oh, absolutely not. And I said, that's kind of how I feel all the time. So initially, that's how I felt. Um, and, luckily or fortunately, we were able to clear all of that up. Now, I really, in order to keep it at bay, I really have to follow what my vestibular therapist taught me. I really have to plan ahead for each day. I make my lunch at night. I go through the motions on how to pick up my bag, how to load the washer, how to get into the car, how to not race through things. Because if I'm not following those therapeutic actions and I am moving my head around too much, I will develop brain fog. Um, and then there's other tips and tools I use throughout the day also to combat that, like to keep me on track so I don't end up racing. Like I'll set timers on a day that I need to work. I'll set a timer on the time I need to get up, the time I need to start getting in the car, the time I need to, whatever events I have throughout the rest of the day, just to keep me on track so I don't have that last minute race that could cause me to not feel well.
so, and it
Interesting.
sounds like what you're doing is not just avoiding what we'll call brain fog triggers, but avoiding all you're managing all your vestibular triggers, because if you trigger your vestibular symptoms, then that leads to brain fog. So
Exactly. Mine are two in one. My
Mhm.
brain fog pretty much comes with the dizziness.
Well, and it makes sense because, and I feel like we've heard this somewhere along the line, Cynthia, in this podcast, that when there's so much that the brain is tracking, when there's dizziness, there's the perception, there's the auditory, it's an overload that suddenly comes in, and it seems like it would make sense that there would some sort of fuzziness would develop out of that. It's as if our brains become static with all the input. That's not scientific by any means, but it makes sense that the dizziness would enhance that.
and Dr. Jordan, back to something that you had mentioned that kind of made me connects with what Anne was saying about managing her vestibular
Mhm.
symptoms in order to avoid the brain fog coming on. You were saying that brain fog and differentiating brain fog um, and dementia, brain fog is temporary. Meaning, and I had a question about that, but I have two questions. Does that mean it comes and goes, or does that mean it's temporary at this time in your life, and then, when you're through menopause, for example, or maybe you're on the other side of your vestibular journey where you've controlled um, you've learned to control your symptoms, then you're going to get it less. But also, it seems like fatigue seems really connected to brain fog. Would that be
Mhm.
accurate as opposed to dementia, for example? Would you say that fatigue and brain fog kind of go together?
Oh my God, they go hand in hand. So I think it depends on what's causing the brain fog, right? So obviously, if the brain fog is being contributed to because you're taking pain medications or other medications, maybe even for shingles, as you mentioned, right? Or if you're not sleeping. So midlife is the time when everybody starts having trouble sleeping, men and women, but menopausal women in particular, 2/3 report that they don't sleep well. So the sleep disruption combined with chronic fatigue is an exacerbation for a lot.
Mhm.
It can exacerbate ADHD. It can exacerbate um, vestibular issues. It can exacerbate stress. It can exacerbate all sorts of things and makes our cortisol levels go up. So in general, is not a great thing. I mean, there's lots of science and data about how sleep is healthy for us. It also so impacts our quality of life,
Mhm.
right? So fatigue can sort of trigger a lot of bad things health wise, as well as just our enjoyment. And it can be really increasingly challenging as we age. And then women in particular have an extra challenge layered in with menopause. I'm curious, Anne, though, when you were talking about how this happened to you, if anyone talked to you or asked you about your hormones, because vestibular migraines in particular have been linked to having estrogen levels under 50. Like, that's been shown.
Right.
But
Well,
yeah.
well, it's interesting because I 6 months before this happened, I have blood work drawn every 6 months. I had asked my doctor to include the hormones, and they were normal, and there was nothing. And then that December, I was like, oh, well, it's time to draw that lab work again because I do it every 6 months. And I said, let's include it again. I feel so off this month. I just knew I
Mhm.
was just off. And I said, I'm so curious. I want to include it. And they said, sure, no problem. And so it's just this regular blood work I have for cholesterol, and
Mhm.
which is inherited from my father. And so by the time I had the shingles, I had my so I had shingles, and then my doctor then sent me the blood work results, and he said menopause is near. So I went from having no no problem 6 months before, where then the blood work was so different.
Wow.
I don't know if that makes sense to you.
It's classic,
And
actually.
so then when I mentioned it to my OBGYN at the time, who was a different person, she says, I honestly don't know, Anne, if you got the shingles and the shingles pushed off your hormones, or your hormones pushed you into the shingles. Like it was one of those things, like what came first, the chicken or the egg,
Mm.
but it was the most excruciating year of my life.
Mhm.
And
Well, and then
so
which triggered the vestibular migraines? Is it all of it, or
Uh,
you?
Yeah.
yeah. And the damage, the
Mhm.
damage that, because all of a sudden I have tinnitus, I have all this nerve pain. And, I've been told the migraines, when a migraine hits, it rolls in and takes over the weakest parts of your body. You know what I mean? And now all of a sudden my ears are vulnerable. So, um,
Yeah, the hormone milieu affects migraines as well. I mean, probably maybe people here have heard of, menstrual migraines, which means
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I had
Mhm.
gotten most of my life.
yeah, but then you have hormone changes in adolescence and you have hormone changes in menopause as well that are
Yeah.
associated with changes. And vestibular migraines in particular they're more common in women when their estrogen levels dips below 50. And in our fertile years, our estrogen levels are up at like 300 to 500, depending on where you are in your cycle.
Right.
But at postmenopause, you're under 10. So perimenopause are those years for most people in their 40s, but it can be earlier,
Mm-hmm.
where you have what's called a roller coaster, where you're going up and down. You stop making estrogen and progesterone, and then your body reacts by sort of flogging your ovaries to make more. So you can have sort of symptoms of menopause, and then you kind of flog your ovaries to make more, and then you come
Got
out
it.
of it. So what can happen is exactly what happened to you. It's so interesting, is that you can have the symptoms, you go to the doctor's office, you get tested, and you're in the peak of the roller coaster. So your labs
Mm-hmm.
come out looking normal. And then, but what you're actually in is this roller coaster. And it's super interesting because there's Lisa Mosconi there's a huge brain study that she runs out of Cornell. She wrote The Menopause Brain.
Mm-hmm.
It actually talks about that roller coaster period actually being worse for brain fog than
Mm.
postmenopause. So it's the swings and the changes that are actually very challenging. So she's actually done some studies that look at sort of cognitive testing for women in
Sure.
midlife, and it's actually worse in perimenopause and then gets better in
Okay.
full menopause. So I
Huh.
think when
Interesting.
new symptoms emerge in sort of midlife, I think people should think of perimenopause more.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. That's really
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, the
And that
roller
makes sense. I mean, I've had menstrual brain fog my whole life. There will be, a couple days out of the month where I'm like, not thinking clearly today. And it's so predictable. I don't think back when I was a teenager, there was a name for it. I just thought this day is shot. But now I think that fluctuation, especially like you just said, Dr. Jordan, if it's exaggerated in the late 30s, 40s, early 50s, I could see it becoming a real persistent problem.
Well, one thing
And oh, go
I was
ahead.
going to say, I agree that roller coaster sucks. When I was going through menopause,
Just sum it up. Yes.
ask my husband, it sucked. Get through it.
It
Um,
does. Yeah.
and that with vestibular patients, that's not something you're necessarily going to get through. You can learn to control your symptoms, but it's always going to potentially be there if you're deconditioned, for example. So, Kimberly, you had a question. I'll pass it
Oh,
back.
yeah. No, I like that point that you made there, Cynthia. There's so much to talk about here. I could jump in on my own experience too. But Anne, how about you jump in and tell us a little bit of some strategies that you've developed as soon as you start to feel some of that cognitive fatigue? You mentioned earlier that you follow your physical therapist's instructions and
Mm-hmm.
you very
Mm-hmm.
deliberately move through your day. But what about right at the onset?
Um, well, I talked a little bit about the fatigue or the brain fog. You know, I think I think what feel is important. I was doing some reflection on this, and it's what it's important to you. I mean, it's what it's important to the individual. I mean, and that's what I've learned through all of this. I mean, I went from never being sick to now I'm like seeing the doctors all the time. And what keeps your self-esteem high? And so when I have brain fog and in the past, the things that have down my self-esteem are like one time, okay, so I wear these rimless glasses. One time I lost them, and it was right after I got them. And I always put my glasses in the same place. But because of brain fog, I lost them. And it's really hard to find glasses when you don't have glasses to wear to find them.
Mm.
And there's no rims on them. And you don't have backup glasses. So I troubleshooted that. And after a couple of days of crying and trying to find them. We eventually found them in my house. They were wrapped up in a blanket, but I bought a backup pair of glasses, and I have them. And now I know where I put those glasses. And the same thing goes for especially parking. And whether you just have brain fog or have brain fog and a vestibular condition, parking decks and parking lots are horrible. At least for me, if you're going up the parking deck or if you're looking at that whole line of parking spaces with all of those cars, especially after a workout, because you don't necessarily feel good when you're coming out of the workout facility. Um, for me, I would feel at my all-time low when I couldn't find my car. And that's a brain fog thing. And for me, I now make a game how to find my car. And when I go to a facility that I always go to for the track, I park by the garbage can and I know I'm parking by Oscar the Grouch. And if I'm parking on a parking deck and I'm on floor 5, I have 5 people in my family, 3 kids and my husband and I. Okay, so I'm on floor 5. I have to make it a game. So for me, I think for the patient, you need to identify what really affects you and how can you keep your mood up and what can you do, whether it's buying something or making a game out of it. Um, or texting yourself something in order to keep your mind going active during that horrible brain fog moment. And it may be something like saying to your son, "Okay, could you text me that? I need to know 145 East, Jeffrey Drive. I need to know that address and you need to text me that." As for working with the symptoms, I do a lot of resting. I like a lot of quiet places. I prefer quiet places. And in my past, I learned self hypnosis, and I'll close my eyes and rest, and that will give me the energy to combat the fatigue and the brain fog. And I usually rest for about 5 minutes, and that will bring me out of it. If it's something physical where my ears seem a little clogged, I drink lots of water, and I'll have some menthol, some peppermint, cough drop or something, and that'll help clear my system up, wake myself up. I know some people drink caffeine, sometimes that makes it worse for me, but yeah, so those are some of my tips and tricks.
I like the game. I like the game
Yeah.
idea partly because it gives you something else to focus on in it. It kind of lifts the seriousness of it so that you're not
Mhm.
down on yourself. I think that's
Yeah.
half the battle is getting frustrated with yourself that you can't do the things that you feel like you should be able to do, and giving yourself by making and giving yourself grace by making it a game.
Mhm.
It's not as serious. It's just a thing that happens and you deal
Right.
with it.
Right.
Yeah. And
So
I also normalizing it, realizing that everyone
Yeah.
else is doing it. I'll tell you that happens to
Right.
me.
I
At the
I
airport, I have to take a picture of where I park. So
Yeah, me too.
yeah, so I think normalizing it, realizing this is not
Mhm.
early onset dementia is also
No,
key.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that
Yeah.
you brought up hypnosis. So I think,
Yeah.
Yeah.
at Midi, we talk about traditional medicine, hormones, prescriptions, things that improve things, but there's a lot of science and evidence behind some of these integrative solutions. And hypnosis in particular, spent a lot of time recently meeting with experts, and hypnosis can actually help with hot flashes and night sweats, help with sleep, help
Mm.
with stress management. There's now easily available. It wasn't very practical because you just have to go see someone and do it in person. And sometimes they trained you to do it yourself, which sounds like what you do. But there's
Mhm.
also apps now that you
Mm.
can get on your phone for. They're usually very affordable. Sometimes they have free trials. So it's something to try. I think we have some patients who use it for sleep. They use it for, stress management. They use it for hot flashes, night sweats, particularly when they're not eligible for hormones because of some medical reason.
so
Ah,
Yeah.
how does hypnosis work? Are you trying
yeah.
to passively trick the brain into a different brain state? How does it help with brain fog specifically?
Well, brain fog is a wide constellation of things, right? But think about having all these complex neurotransmitters that work. And let's take hot flashes, night sweats, right? So people think about it as being very not brain, but your thermoregulation is happening in your brain, right? So it
Mhm.
comes from your hypothalamus. So when you do things like so exercise, things that change your hormone, your cortisol level, have an
Yeah.
indirect activity on your neurotransmitter activities. So you're going to increase your serotonin, which is kind of your Zen hormone, which makes you feel calm and relaxes you. So it depends on the symptom that you're treating with hypnosis, how they work, but there's more and more data that hypnosis causes organic changes that actually can help you go through symptoms, get through
I
symptoms.
think those organic changes, I was just remembering Alyssa Kennedy Jones. She's a friend and a writer
Mhm.
that I follow, and she was just recently talking about her brain fog. And one of the things is just to switch in and out of sympathetic and parasympathetic. And it can be as simple as holding on to an ice cube for 10
Mhm.
seconds and then letting it go and putting your hand in a bath of warm water. And so I thought, oh, this is cool. And I've also know with Malde debarkment that they're one of our guests recently said that it might be a venous vascular issue. And so I was like, well, how do I get that lymphatic flow from my head then? So I've been
Mhm.
sticking my head in a bowl of cold water every morning. I just keep the ice in the freezer and then I put the water on top of it. And it is such a clarifying way to wake up. I don't know if
Mhm.
I'm helping drain the lymphatics from, the Malde debarkment or if it's a brain fog thing, but I do think there is something to that. What you're saying, the switching between states.
Mhm.
And there's lots of ways to do that probably. And hot and cold is one of them.
Oh yeah, cold plunges is all the craze. I think
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
longevity yeah, the longevity
Yeah.
community is really getting into that. I've been looking at the literature. It's hard to know, right? Because there's not long-term studies to know if it impacts longevity really, because it's a recent craze. So we have to watch these people and see how they do. But the best evidence that's
Yeah.
really looked at is like really cold for 20 minutes or longer,
Mhm.
true dips. But I have lots of friends, colleagues that love the cold plunge, the cold shower, a cold swim.
That's me.
Yeah,
Yeah, cold shower.
and it makes you feel better, and it's a great quality of
Mhm.
life, and it may help your longevity, so why not?
And
Right.
does it help you with your brain fog?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, it
Absolutely.
does.
That,
Fantastic.
and when I'm in a really bad flare, and this started at the very beginning, gosh, 5 years ago, I would take, sensory. I went into like the dollar store and bought brushes, like a brush for my arm, like to while I was in the shower, I'd brush just so I could feel, because I felt like I was so numb with the brain fog, or like a loofah, so I could feel when I was in that flare, something sensory, because you can get that out of it when you have a vestibular migraine flare, and that would help too with the cold shower.
Hmm,
Mhm.
Wow,
interesting.
that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Mhm.
That's good.
Well, let's move over to your family and friends. What are some ways that you enlist their help during these periods?
They've been great. When I worked in the office, I mean, there would be a couple things I couldn't do. That was back when I was full time. And without a doubt, somebody would always help me out, like, oh, I can't, do X, Y, or Z because it would make me dizzy, and they would help me. Um, and now I'm working with older adults, some with dementia. And if it's something like I'm having a symptomatic day, and I'm supposed to do chair exercises for everyone, lead the group. I can't do that because I would be more dizzy at the end of the chair exercises. So somebody will always step in. They know my situation, and we all have our life stories, and I'm there for them, and I feel blessed to be a part of a good team. Um, my home, my kids have been great. My husband has been great. Thank goodness I haven't had a flare in a very long time, but they help me count my medicine, set my timers. Um, you know, they'll, um, I'm trying to think of other good examples, but they'll text me things, they'll take pictures for me. Um, oh, we um we found out early on that I can't uh unload the laundry machine because it's too far down. I'm only 5'3".
Mhm.
And so my boys will always step in and, unload the laundry machine. I need a front loader. But and my husband just agreed, we're redoing our house and we took out the island in our kitchen because that was always a big obstacle for me. And I know it sounds silly, but if I were to move around the island a lot and do a lot of up and down and back and forth around the island, I would develop some brain fog and dizziness. So
Mm.
we're in the process of um, getting an island with wheels so that we can move off to the corner. So some things are little and some things are big, but
Yeah.
I've been fortunate.
Yeah, it sounds like you have been, and I think not everybody is as fortunate. I think
Hmm.
some people have a difficult time sharing that they have this, what they perceive as a vulnerability, brain fog.
Definitely.
They interpret it as, not being smart, or
Yeah.
losing their capacity, and it's embarrassing, and it can be hard to talk about. So I think just a shout out to everybody who's listening, that you might be surprised if you do talk about it, how much people will understand. Everybody's
Hmm.
probably experienced this for a moment, at least sometime in their life. And it is important to communicate, and with
Hmm.
friends and family, and with coworkers, as you do, Anne. So
Mhm.
hopefully
Well,
everybody.
yeah. And to piggyback on that, we had a participant the other day, and I had brain fog. And I called him the wrong name. Let's just say his name is Jim, and I call him Tim. And I said, "Oh, I am so sorry." And I said, "I know your name." And I said, "Remember a long time ago I said that I get migraines?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Sometimes I get a little brain fog." And he said, "Oh, Anne, I'm so sorry to hear that." So here he is feeling sorry for me. You know what I mean? And he's a participant in our program. And it was kind of nice. It was kind of like a relationship builder. Like I shared
Mhm.
my weakness with him and he had, feelings for me about that. And also I wanted him to know I know his name, you know.
Yeah.
So it is good to share sometimes when
Yeah,
you think you can.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Jordan, I wanted to ask you, because I know that everybody here who's listening, they want to know, what can I do about this? I
Mhm.
know I have this, but what can I do about it? Um, so I have two kind of related questions for you. Are there different types of brain fog that need to be managed differently, like the inability to focus, lack of attention, inability to sequence, do things, in a certain order, and specifically, what strategies can manage those pieces, and some examples like supplements, dietary changes, exercise, are those things that have been proven to help with brain fog.
All right. Well, let me take a little pieces of that at a time. So, in relation, following up on what you had talked about too, about talking about it, is I'd say the first thing you need to do is find a clinician that listens to you, right? And
Mhm.
I will say the most common comment we get at Midi is, I finally feel heard," which to me is sad because it means that they've not been heard before. And there are actually lots of studies looking at women going in with all sorts of issues, but particularly around menopause and midlife, which brain fog is a big component. And 75% of patients tell you, this is not a mini study, this is like an independent study, say that they were met with a shrug or, "I don't know, no plan, no workup." So I do think we all deserve a clinician that listens, right? And they may not have all the answers, but just by listening is validating. And at least they can give you direction and say, maybe go here, maybe try this, try to read this book, or refer you. But if you just get a stop, like you go to a clinician with an issue and you get a shrug and no direction, seek another clinician, right? So you may get a different answer. So look for someone who listens, for one. And number two, I think, remember, brain fog is not a diagnosis. It's not one pathology. It can be triggered by illnesses or certain conditions that you have. It can be triggered by medications, can be triggered by menopause, can be triggered by sleep deprivation. So I think what you need to do is think about what the triggers are and sort of what buckets you're in. And a lot of times it's multifactorial as well. So I would say sleep issues are huge. For women, hot flashes and night sweats are shown to contribute. But there's all sorts of triggers. COVID is a trigger, right? So there, vitamin D depletion, which all adults are challenged with. The majority of adults are vitamin D deficient, can be challenging. Staying hydrated, right? So, so there's depends on your triggers. So the solutions are going to be different depending on what's contributing to your situation.
Gotcha.
So if sleep is your major issue, for example, I would have a sort of a multidisciplinary integration. Like hormones can help you sleep if you're a female, for sure. Progesterone in particular, replacement can help you sleep. Their exercise can help you sleep. That's long been shown. It actually increases serotonin and helps you relax later in the day. Magnesium supplements can help you sleep. Stress management can help you sleep. Things like ashwagandha can help you sleep. If sleep is your trigger for brain fog, right? But if you have other triggers, it might be some medication management. It might be stress management. So I think there's different solutions for different buckets, if that makes sense.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're not treating the brain fog. You're treating the condition that's causing the brain fog.
Right.
Yeah.
And those are multifactorial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's those heavy hitters like exercise that may be doing a lot of things at once. So if you don't know, it seems like go to the, hydrate and get some exercise and improve your sleep in whatever way you can. And those seem like just those three would be really, really helpful in minimizing symptoms.
Absolutely. And I do think I'm going to put a plug in for this for midlife women in particular. Only 2 to 4% of women, depending on the study, access hormonal solutions. And hormone solutions are not for everyone, but it's for more than 2 to 4%, right? Wow. So, 75% of people have hot flashes and night sweats, which disrupt their sleep. Like there's a lot of changes. So I do think that every woman should have that an informed conversation about it. It doesn't mean it's for you, but you at least deserve an informed conversation around it.
Mm-hmm. And if it is for you, like some of my girlfriends that are on it, it's like life changing.
It can be. And you also need to be screened for contributing things. Like, 6% of women have thyroid issues, which can do all sorts of things, right? And men also get thyroid issues, so they should be screened. Women, it's more common, but men, it still happens. So there's lots of reasons, I think, to go get screened. And the other big thing I think that is underappreciated is diabetes and prediabetes. It's not restricted to persons that are obese. There's some genetic components. I have prediabetes from my family, but 37% of women have prediabetes and just slightly less than that for men. And that's where you're getting huge swings in your blood sugar levels. So that can contribute to highs and lows. It can contribute to weight gain. It can contribute to poor eating habits because you go from being really hungry to being really full. So looking at contributing factors like that, I think it's really important to get screened. And even when people get screened for this, the people that test into prediabetes are often told that they're normal because they don't have diabetes. But prediabetes means you have a third of a chance you're going to get full-blown diabetes, but it also means you're experiencing these swings, which can exacerbate and trigger other symptoms.
Wow, that's really useful information. Thank you, Dr. Jordan.
Yeah.
And I want to just jump in because I know that there's a lot of different things that we try to do in our lives that are affected by vestibular disorders and by brain fog. And do you have any activities in particular that are really affected by brain fog? I know for me, writing, I write a lot, but on the days I have brain fog, it's just like, nope, not even going to try unless I just want to write soup, which is a fun exercise in and of itself, but it doesn't produce anything.
Right. I feel like my short-term memory is the most affected by the brain fog. I feel like my long-term memory is always clear as can be, but I'll be honest, I won't be recalling people's names as frequently if I'm at work, I mean, or anywhere else. I'll be a little bit more timid to do that, or to say, oh, Susie over there. I'll be more timid because I won't be as confident in myself. Um, and so that's kind of a general thing. Um, I, y- you know, I trying to think. I don't do too much writing anymore as much as I used to. Um, but when I was working full time, I just had cheat sheets everywhere for when I would be working. I worked with high schoolers and in the college setting, and I would do groups of testing, and I had so many notes just to keep me on task.
Mm.
And thankfully, I would be able to make it through it. Um, but my short-term memory is not the best. I think that that's just the most affected when I have brain fog. So whether it's shopping
Yeah.
or working and saying a personal thing to someone with their name, I'm not as confident in myself.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I have a kind of a final question for both of you, which is, do you have any final words of wisdom that you would give to people who are struggling with brain fog, people who are frustrated about not being able to think as clearly as they used to and do the things that they used to do when they're in that space? Dr. Jordan, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think I would do a screener for dementia, and I would expect 99% of people in midlife to screen out, but that itself can be reassuring, right? So making sure it's not that. There are screeners that clinicians can do in the office. We use a NeuroTrack screener in our patients, which is a software that takes about 5 minutes. So it can be very reassuring to go through that and make sure it's brain fog first. Then I would say lean into sleep.
Mhm.
Get screened for contributing medical conditions like thyroid disease, menopause, Parkinson's, things like that, right? So look for contributing other causes, depression, and then lean into diet, lifestyle, diet, exercise, and social situations. Like being social is actually very important to our overall health, um, and is helpful on many fronts as well. So sleep, diet, exercise, and being social are sort of the
Yeah.
big four,
Yeah.
I
And
think.
I would just add to that for anybody listening, all at your own level and capacity. A lot of people with vestibular disorders, being social in and of itself
Mhm.
is a trigger, but there are ways, and we have other podcasts and other resources that talk about ways to be social and to know your limits. And the same
Mhm.
with exercise. Exercise doesn't necessarily mean going for a run around the block.
No, in fact, there's an increasing awareness that it's actually strength exercises that help. So it can be sitting in a chair and lifting weights, and the strength exercises helps with muscle mass as well as bone health, which when you have vestibular disorders is hugely important because it helps muscle mass is going to help you with stability, and having strong bones is going to help prevent fractures. So there is more and more evidence. I think there's been a huge emphasis on aerobic exercise, but non-aerobic exercise and sort of, which is weight bearing, which can be lifting things, pushing against things, using your body weight, are increasingly recognized as being good for your heart. It is also good for weight management. It's good for insulin sensitivity. It's good for muscle mass stability, preventing fractures, bone health. So I think we're seeing a shift to, yes, aerobic exercise is great, but we need to, especially women who have traditionally not been weightlifter types,
Mhm.
leaning into sort of these muscle building exercises as well.
That's really
I'm
helpful.
glad you mentioned that. I think that's essential and has been, for me personally, even a really, really important aspect of managing the vestibular disorder and well-being, just a sense of well-being.
Right.
So,
Anne, how about you? What words of wisdom would you give to other vestibular patients who are frustrated by their brain fog?
Just to be kind to yourself and find out what would bring you happiness, even if it's something little. Um, I've really enjoyed sitting in nature, sitting on a park bench looking at the trees, um, and enjoying that, taking a break when you need to, which is something I never did before, to slow down. Um, and, knowing that this is just the beginning, things do get better. Um, and then also have a sense of humor. I go back to my early days, and I still today sometimes slip and say, I call it brain frog. I've said that to medical professionals and just laugh. I mean, it's funny. There's no such thing as perfect in life, and if it were, it would be a boring world. And so just give yourself grace and find out what works for you. And join an online community, whether it be a Vita one or another one. um, and find your tribe. I have some great friends from Vita that have helped me a lot. And yeah, it's gonna get better.
That's perfect.
yeah.
Perfect way to end. Thank you
Yeah.
both so much
Great
for
message.
sharing your experience and your expertise with us today.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
creating
Thank
this
you all.
community. It's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful
Thank you.
conversation.
Thanks for tuning in to ICU this month.
We hope this conversation sparked new understanding of the vestibular journey. And for all of our patients out there, leaves you feeling just a little more heard and a little more seen. I see you.